Hey guys, Youngblood with you for your Summarize the Verse, covering around the verse from 9:21. And starting off with the burndown, the DevOps team is really preparing the build to get ready for distribution, while some of the other development teams are actually going through and problem solving and troubleshooting and triaging all of the bugs that we have placed. Now, when the week last started, they actually started with 26 must-fix bugs, which was 11 blockers, 10 criticals, and 5 highs. And again, those are the ones that are getting in the way of it actually reaching Evocati. Now, they said in their first staff meeting that they showed in this episode on the 18th, so Monday, that they want to try and get it to Evocati this week. So they've had to cut back on their blocker list a little bit, but it does seem like they're trying to target this week. So maybe today, again, let's all be conservative and assume next week or a little bit after, but hopefully, or I guess we should say that's at least a nice thing to see. Some of the issues they ran into was that they found an issue where when you spawn into Levski, you can't actually exit the spawn room, that little heavy cube, and that was fixed by removing some of the animations that shouldn't have been in that build, which they considered being an easy fix. The QA team found an issue where the air traffic controller wasn't assigning a landing pad or a ship didn't actually spawn, and it was only happening on release builds, not development builds, which made it challenging to actually troubleshoot. It ended up being an operator that was trying to respond to you when you were making a request, but it was dropping into an invalid state, so he wasn't able to communicate with you or receive your communications, even though he was sitting there thinking that was happening. One build had a big crash issue in the data core, which is where a lot of the data is stored. It was basically giving an 80% crash chance. That was one that took a long time to get fixed, but they ended up resolving it. Live builds again, there was one where none of the networking messages were actually going through, so you could boot in, but interactions with things like doors or the Moby Glass failed, and you would end up disconnecting. It was fixed, but this was a long one to resolve, so it slowed down the development because a lot of people had to roll back to previous versions to be able to actually continue testing and development. There were some ownership and hierarchy issues with players and ships that were causing issues with persistence and crashing, but after changing the communication protocols prior to deletion, most of that's been resolved. They did come up with a stability score, which basically takes into account what like a threshold is based on the impressions from the community on how stable the build is. And they're using 3.0 as a baseline, so anything that's more stable than 3.0 ends up having a better stability score, and their goal over time is to drop what the threshold is for an unstable build and continuing to give us better releases. And during the time of filming, they were down to 7 blockers to Evocati release, so we are getting very, very close. I think I saw somewhere else that we're actually down to the real number being 5, so they are honing in on what they need to get done. The deeper dive this week was done on around the air traffic controller system, or the ATC. And in today's game, you can really just land anywhere you want. And the goal is, with the ATC in place, that you have to request a landing, and the NPC or the automated system's then going to assign you a location, which is basically going to be a landing pad of the appropriate size. And then it's going to give you other information, like the length of time you're allowed to stay there, and like what security measures are in place on the station, and just other information. And as part of this, they actually went in and studied real air traffic controllers, as well as doing motion capture to end up getting you realistic animations that could then end up being edited and implemented into game in different locations around the verse. They do need to account for things like players strafing the station and doing kind of silly things, so there are some punishments that they're trying to put in place for like players that act out a little bit. Hopefully that's more in the regards to like trolling and harassing people at like landing zones. They do say that it is a game, so it obviously still needs to be fun, but they are trying to figure out ways to kind of keep things somewhat civil. When you actually show up and you hail a station or an outpost or something like that, it goes through the subsumption system to really interact with the NPC that's tapping into the ATC entity, and then they're using their own sensors to check how many ships are around, how many landing pads are there, and then they kind of open, they decide how many of those are actually open for players, and then they make assignments based on that. There are some base AIs that you're going to see at various locations, kind of used over and over and over again. However, some locations are going to have unique characters. Like at Levski, you end up having this super chill dude that's waiting to work with you and kind of fits the flavor of Levski. And finally, they did say that the ATC AI can only really work with one player at a time by design. So there are some sync concerns that they needed to address, and that ends up making sure that multiple players aren't given the same pad, and it's controlled through the subsumption system. So hopefully we end up getting something here pretty soon. Otherwise, there's your rundown. If you have questions, let me know. And then stay tuned for more coming your way soon, and have a wonderful day. Take care.